there, I'd like to invite the infrastructure team. Let me first welcome, or at least call for acknowledgement, the chair, Mr. Felix Addo, and his team. So the infrastructure team, if you can please rise. Oh, come on, guys. Put your hands together for the infrastructure team, chaired by Mr. Felix Addo. And David Oposu-Dorte is the presenter. He doesn't need slides. He just needs to show up.
Thank you, Bernard. Good afternoon, Excellency the Vice President, Honorable Minister, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. So it's a privilege to speak on behalf of the infrastructure session. Infrastructure is quite a complex matter, and we decided to reduce the complexity by not doing any slides and just presenting the issues as they are. Now, we are aware that the government wants to do the big push, $10 billion estimated, and then you have an IMF program. So that's the challenge we faced. Having said that, I was going to ask our members to stand up for recognition, but Bernard has done that on my behalf. So we took infrastructure from a simplistic point of view as to what we use it for. And let's first look at how we feed ourselves, and that's with agriculture. And the way we put it is that the recommendations we are making are straightforward. We believe that these recommendations are to go into the budget, and our view is that if the recommendations are accepted, either all or most, if you change the should in all our recommendations to will or shall, it shall be a budget statement. So for agriculture, we believe government should incentivize private sector to invest in agri infrastructure, particularly irrigation and warehousing and pack houses for the consolidation and aggregation of agricultural products. We believe that in view of the need to have minimum recourse, we should look at projects that have some form of ability to recover cost, if not all. And we particularly recommend that the Pualugu irrigation project be looked at from all its multifaceted angle as one of the first projects in the agriculture sector. We are mindful about the challenges relating to it. We think whatever it is, those other benefits, including its potential for renewable energy, can have multiplier effect, as well as the fact that some plantation farmers may be able to pay part of the cost, and then we think government should bear the viability gap that will arise in order to help de-risk agricultural infrastructure, and that will be an example for that purpose. So if that is done, then government should encourage ownership by private sector and the development of other agri infrastructure. So that's for agriculture. Let me move to housing. Now for housing, we segregated housing into two clear, distinct parts: the low cost and affordable housing, which for the mass, and then those which are at the higher end. We pegged the low cost as $50,000 and below, equivalent in CD terms. So having said that, we have reason to believe that the law we already have on the ground regarding the vatable component of real estate may come back. But if it will, then the team agreed with the proposal by Grida that it should be graduated, and that those infrastructure relating to housing 50,000 and below should be zero rated, whereas the rest are graduated from 1% upwards to 5%. We have the table of what the amounts are, and we shall make it available. Having said that, we think SEC, as the Securities and Exchange Commission, GSC, Abnamwa just left here, and GIF and other allied agencies should work with Ministry of Finance to structure more investable instruments of asset classes, and this affect other infrastructure sectors, not only housing. Because we think one of the challenges of pension funds playing a role in this is the way we don't have clearly defined investable asset classes for fund managers. I sit on a fund management board, so I have an idea of what I'm talking about. Having said that, we think Tier 1 and Tier 2 pension funds, as is SNIT and Tier 2, should come in and allow pension funds not only to be used, if possible, in an untaxable deposit arrangement for the low income, that's the 50,000 and below, but also as a recourse to default. So that way, we should be able to de-risk the market. Having said that, I think there is quite a lot of talk about the cost of infrastructure generally, and I'll return to this subject, Excellency, as I proceed. But we tend to overlook the other things that contribute to cost. I just heard a presentation on ECG, inability to recover all their, as it were, the payments. But part of it is attributable to our failure to enforce development control provisions and our special plans under Act 925. If we do that, things will become much easier and the cost of development of housing will be stepped down. So we made that recommendation as well. Then we took at university education. There is a report I've had the privilege of having a look at. It appears, notwithstanding the huge increase in the enrollment of children for schools, it turns out that our population growth is actually ahead of the supply of infrastructure for schools and our ability to accommodate. I've heard about 60,000 admissions and the rest. So having said that, we believe that structures exist now for entities like GIF to help develop student accommodation. There's a feasibility of a bankable project to be able to supply about 10,000 houses, for example, 10,000 hostel accommodation at the University of Ghana without recourse to government debt. And that's the kind of approach that we took in making the recommendations. All our recommendations are as much as possible with minimal or no recourse to government debt, because we are mindful about the big push, notwithstanding the fact that government doesn't have that much room to maneuver when it comes to finance. So that is for university accommodation. Now, in line with government's energy transition plan, we also recommend that government should encourage all secondary schools to work with private sector to install solar in most secondary schools, if not all, and have structures to ensure that the payment is borne by the private sector. The advantage is that it will leverage our ability to attract funding in other forms for the sector. The other thing we recommend government should do is that they should have a database, published database of the needs of second cycle and primary institutions which require upgrade as well as supply of equipment and related infrastructure activities, so that that database will be made available to corporate entities who want to select from this and be able to develop those infrastructure as part of their CSR, of course, aligned to their tax and other incentives that they may attract. Again, that is one way of taking the burden off government. So at the same time, being able to attract funding and being able to, align it with the energy transition policy from the second cycle institution. To enhance this, we recommend that the Ministry of Finance through the Public Investment Division develop a bankability criteria which will be used as a basis for determining whether such projects should be done at tertiary level, at the secondary level, and related activities. Actually, we do have an outline of what the bankability criteria should look like, but the 20 minutes we have will not allow us to go into that, so those attachments will be made available. We looked at infrastructure also from standards of living from different angles. The first one to talk about is water. Once we know that water is essential for all of us, we are aware of the shortages, especially in urban areas. We believe that this program, there should be a program to take a look at Ghana's huge potential of its ability to export water. That may sound strange to many, but there are projects, actually, some led by the African Development Bank, to tap into the Sogakope Lome water project and export potable water from Ghana to Lome. The advantage of it is that that project enables us to earn dollars to offset the tariff in the lower end for those who need water in Ghana and may not be able to afford commercial rates if private sector comes in. At the same time, that project, which is fully studied, and the African Development Bank is aware about this, which is fully studied, or at least almost fully studied, has a component in Ghana which will allow a 360,000 meter cube, 72 kilometer pipeline to increase water supply to Accra and solve part of the problem. And the cross-subsidization of water exports will change the dynamics significantly. It is more of action and concerted action that is required on the part of GWCL and the government of Ghana side. So this is not new. It has been dragging for a very long time. Health. We restricted ourselves to health to only two things. We believe that regional hospitals and the rest are going to be on the basis of government funds. And we do believe also that when it comes to the upper end, there's quite a lot of private sector opportunities, so we did not bother about that. But we focused on the chips compound, which can actually will actually require up to about 6,000 chip compounds in communities across the country. Our findings, and these are backed by evidence, indicates that the government can attract up to 50 to 75% of grant money available to be able to improve the supply of equipment for chip compounds across the nation once we prioritize and rank them. And we believe this is one way to minimize the cost component that the government has to contribute to be able to make health available for all, and I'm talking about health in this modern sense. On Agenda 111, the recommendation is that the government should prioritize the project, and I think the president himself said that yesterday, and bring in the possibility of GIF leveraging its social infrastructure component as a basis to be able to deliver those which can be delivered to a point of a minimum cost recovery if possible. Now, we also looked at infrastructure in terms of licenses on spectrum and ICT, and the recommendation for spectrum licensing is to tie the expansion to specific targets of industries as a fair way of linking the spectrum to allocation of networks and expansion commitments. Government can achieve this objective by ensuring that the network connectivity is extended to communities whilst operators get much needed spectrum to deliver improved services. Still on that, the ducts and crossings should be provided during the construction of major roads to redesign, especially when it comes to redesign of existing roads. This step will incentivize the laying of more fiber infrastructure across the nation, and we should consider using Gridco, Netco, and Gensa network as well as pylons. And ECG, which already has fiber network, should increase the opportunity to lay more fiber across the country to make it easily accessible. Actually, education has changed form. These days, if you are not actually educated on technology to some extent, you are functionally illiterate. And this is therefore a very important aspect that we must take a look at. Then support of connectivity using gifted fund and grants should also be considered in partnership with GIFEC and other private sector entities to increase access to broadband and connectivity. Let me move on to transport and connectivity, which was a big one in the room, and there are several aspects of transportation. The first one is to reintroduce tolls. We are aware that at the point tolls were removed, there were investors around who were ready to put in money on toll roads. And the reintroduction of tolls, especially on the highway as well as the urban expressways through PPP mechanisms, will incentivize the private sector to come back. Definitely there are instances or the areas where there will be financing gaps, but the more the financing gap is minimized, the lesser the recourse to government. And we believe that specific projects like Accra to Takrady, Accra Kumasi, and Accra Flow are areas where government can use these main arterial roads to explore PPP opportunities. I know a lot of people do have sentiments when it comes to PPPs and will try to explain all the theories about PPPs. The important point is that you cannot have a big push without private sector funding when it comes to this. What is important is to identify the problems and solve those problems whilst we roll out such projects. Having said that, I think it's also important for PPPs in general, and these have been used for other projects. The container terminal is one of them, the MPS terminal is one of them, the National Identification Authority is one of them. But it's important to show more success stories. Every government wants to deliver roads, and unless we explore those options, we can't show the success stories to attract investment. Then there is the international component of roads, and one particular road is of key importance. That is the Abidjan-Lagos corridor. The Abidjan-Lagos corridor, incidentally, has been described in some literature by the American government as the fastest growing megapolis in the world. For the purposes of those who may not understand megapolis, that is when metropolitan areas across countries get to a point where you cannot distinguish which metropolis is in which country. And between Abidjan and Lagos, we may be arriving at that over the next 50-year cycle. That actually may be the reason why African Development Bank is ready to raise about $16 billion to fund Abidjan-Lagos corridor. But the important point we focused on is that 60% of that corridor is within Ghana. And whilst waiting for African Development Bank to fund, the best we can do now is to incentivize private sector and identify to them the potential future investment opportunities along that corridor where they can invest now. For example, logistics hubs and the rest, and there are numerous things that can be done now to enhance the potential Ghana can gain, and that will make Ghana's component of that project much more leveraged. So that's one recommendation that we make. And we believe that this can be done by bringing in not just private sector, but other public sector agencies that can work with private sector to co-fund those infrastructure, allied infrastructure that I have just mentioned. We should ensure that transportation infrastructure is always aligned with operations and cost recovery. That's one of the areas we are lacking a lot. So you will find that we have had projects like BRT, GAPT, etc., Yalolo and the rest, which have not been properly leveraged. Either the infrastructure component was done and the operation component was not done, or vice versa. The need to leverage the two and ensure that we make as much cost recovery as possible is highly recommended as a long-term measure. Then there is the Accra-Tema Motorway ATMP project, where budgetary allocation has already been made. We do believe the continuation of that project as a 10-lane expressway, 27 kilometer, with private sector funding will also continue to show success in other areas. So then let me move to the system of management to be put in place to ensure that not only do we deliver infrastructure, but we maintain it. We have challenges in maintenance culture. There was a lot of debate about the road fund and the fact that the road fund has not achieved its purpose, but that is similar to many of the funds. It's because we end up leveraging it for the wrong purposes. And we think that a high sense of discipline should be introduced when it comes to the road fund to ensure that we do not only, as it were, clear the backlog, but ensure that we stick to what the road fund is meant for. That's for maintenance of roads. I'll move to aviation before I come to maritime and rail, which I will treat together. We believe a conscious drop in aviation fuel by the government will turn KIA into an aviation hub of a sort, or will accelerate the impetus, because at times it is just a question of refueling that increases the traffic at the airport, and the multiplier effects of that infrastructure becomes much more. We are aware that that structure Terminal 3 has been done, but the utility of any airport is based on the frequency of which the tarmac and the runway is used. So definitely it is being used below its capacity. To incentivize or to rather facilitate its use and ensure that the process lead to the expansion of that place and turn Ghana into an aviation hub, we think dropping the fuel of aviation will be a very good attempt that the government can make. Additionally, we believe Tamale and Kumasi Airport may be considered as regional hubs to attract those who operate within the region, especially to the Sahel region, a lot of which actually are crossing Kumasi and Tamale every day, crossing from Cote d'Ivoire to the other side. Let me move to maritime and rail, which I will put together. It is important to rejuvenate the Tema shipyard, engage strategic partner, or ensure that any strategic partner existing is made to revamp the shipyard to bring it to the full function of all its function that it's supposed to play, which is shipbuilding, ship repairs, and particularly because of the 24-hour economy, fabrication. If you look at the 1963 master plan, it is a major component of fabrication industry, which we think it is being highly underutilized. Other fluvial forms of transport in the maritime that has to be considered is the Ancobra and the Volta. I will return to the Volta. But the Ancobra is actually a way, and the navigation has been studied, can be used to actually cut manganese and bauxite to some extent. So these are things that we need to take a look at. We recommend that the GPHA be allowed to ring-fence part of its revenues to raise funds for port expansion on its own books. This has been done before, but if it is purely ring-fenced, then the flow of funds into that becomes private sector. Still on the subject of maritime and railway, we believe that railway is a major way to attract climate funding, especially to the private sector. And therefore, to incentivize that, it is important to accelerate the multimodal use of the water, the railway. In Mpakadan, my information is that the port may not end up being at Mpakadan but somewhere else, but that is beside the point. But a combination of road, rail, and the 400-kilometer waterway on the water creates a situation where we can actually attract a huge amount of climate funds to be able to develop transport infrastructure in its various forms, and that is almost ready. So there is every reason to accelerate the implementation of that. To also help develop more railways and link it to other sectors, including Wankra and the rest, it is important that the provision in the railway fund under the Railway Act 779 be looked at, and the attempts to populate it should begin, so that that becomes a basis that can be used to leverage other funds. And at the same time, allied infrastructure like industrial zones be created alongside Wankra and the rest, in order to make sure that railway plays its real role. Infrastructure as relates to industrialization. Now, it is important that we map foundation minerals to our infrastructure. And by foundation minerals, I mean salt, bauxite, iron ore, and lithium, all of which are not just foundation minerals, but they are critical minerals. The point about foundation minerals is that they are not existing in themselves. They have multiply effect. If you take a critical look at Ghana, you will find that the railway was a triangle, and everything was meant to end at the port to be exported to Europe in those days. So we should be moving from there, if we are doing value addition, which the president talked about, to have a situation where the value addition is actually tied to the minerals and resources we have. Again, studies already exist that we do have $1 trillion in a 50-year cycle if you did an integrated value chain of the aluminum sector alone. So it's important that we do this, and that to do that, we need to ensure that right places are acquired for that purpose. Now, it's important while talking about industrialization to refer to something else regarding infrastructure. The fact that no country can industrialize if it is selling power to strategic industries at more than 6 cents per kilowatt hour. That's a fact. And especially if it sells power to the aluminium smelter only at more than 4 cents per kilowatt hour. This is a tough one, but we need to do it. And the way to do it is not to give discriminatory power to every industry, but to selected industries, those in the iron ore, fabrication, and particularly Valco. And we can do that by exploiting the existing infrastructure which has paid for this itself, that is the water dam, which is currently producing at 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Just in case you want to avoid transmission losses, you can use the Asogli plant, which is next to Valco, and then do a power tariff swap. These are measures that can be explored to ensure that we have that whole value chain, and then do the full. Let me move on. Bernard, I've seen you pacing up and down, but infrastructure is quite important. So I will sort that one out shortly. It is important that in looking at financing, we do not look at financing from the point of view of just the things we have to finance, but what else we can leverage. And therefore, populating the Renewable Energy Fund is a key recommendation. We made the provision is in section 31 of Act 823. We need to take a look at that. We also recommended that grid-co infrastructure should be separated from the transmission infrastructure in order that private sector can invest in the infrastructure relating to the transmission. Now, finally, Her Excellency the Vice President, Honorable Minister, we have no doubt that PPPs will dominate the recommendations we have made. And it is not just because we love PPPs. It is because all of us need infrastructure in one form or the other. And I will be landing in the next 1 minute. Each of us came from our homes, which is infrastructure. Each of us drove in a car, which was on the road, and that's infrastructure. We are here in an infrastructure. We receive light from infrastructure. And when we do this and the cost is being built, we forget that our failure to do other things is what will lead to project affected persons, etc., and increase the cost. So if we have a situation where we have a big push of 10 billion, we have the need to minimize costs, and at the same time, you have a situation where there is 48 months for delivery. Recourse to the private sector is very important, and we believe if that these recommendations are accepted, we can achieve all this without bloating public sector debt. Thank you.
Wow. David Ofosudote for the infrastructure team. One more time. Thank you.